Investigators say it was a disaster which could have been prevented. We'll talk to investigators who say government and the aviation industry knew of potentially fatal problems aboard commercial aircraft, including this 747, problems which still exist, problems, they say, that could lead to another catastrophe in the sky.
But before we tell you some of the disturbing things we found in our investigation, we want to return to the night when an airplane exploded in the sky and talk with eyewitnesses and members of the rescue team to hear the stories of the victims and the loved ones left behind and of their unending quest to close this painful chapter. A chapter which began so routinely with a regularly scheduled airline flight on July 17th, 1996.
Alpha, contact ground point 9.
TWA Flight 800 prepared for takeoff at New York's JFK Airport. 50 miles away off the coast of Long Island, local residents were enjoying the end of a sultry summer day.
Well, it's a beautiful evening coming up. I asked Kenny if he wanted to go for a ride.
We were at 8,500 feet. You can see the beautiful sunset behind us.
280 with 12, runway 31 left at Yankee, clear for takeoff.
As I turned the boat and headed towards home, it's really probably one of the quietest times of the day, you know.
It was a clear, beautiful night. The sea was flat calm. And I was thinking, this is the same kind of night as the night they described when the Titanic went down.
At 8:19 p.m., Transworld Airlines Flight 800 took off as it did every night, bound for Paris, France. 11 minutes off the ground, the flight crew radioed for permission to climb to 15,000 feet. It was the last anyone would ever hear from the jetliner, or from any one of the 230 people on board.
Looked over, saw the running lights of another plane, and the next split second, it was a ball of light.
You can imagine like cracking an eggshell open and watching this ball of fire fall out of the middle of it.
When it hit the water, it was a really loud boom, and I called the Coast Guard at that time.
All of a sudden, every phone in the operations center lit up.
At Moriches Coast Guard Station, they knew that the local Air National Guard was in the area and might be dropping flares as part of a training mission.
My initial thought was that that's what these people were reporting on the phone.
It didn't look like any flare I'd ever seen. It was too bright, you know.
In fact, an Air National Guard unit was practically on the scene. A Black Hawk helicopter and a C-130 fuel tanker happened to be in the air at the moment of the crash. In a bizarre coincidence, they were practicing routine search and rescue drills.
We're looking at the size of this lake of fire and the fact that it continued to burn even though it was totally in the ocean.
Major Fritz Meyer was on board the Black Hawk that night, which got to the site within minutes.
356-350, center line below 1,000 feet.
But even this veteran combat pilot was stunned at what he saw.
I had no idea what I was looking at. It might have been a vehicle from outer space. The tower reports to us that ATC, Air Traffic Control, is looking for a 747. They lost on the radar scope. At that point, it hits.
This is a special report from ABC
We have
News.
just gotten the first sketchiest details of an apparent air tragedy.
The TWA jetliner crashes off the waters of Long Island.
Let's go now to Channel 7. Sylvia Perez live in our newsroom.
Time tonight.
All of a sudden they broke in at about, I don't know, 9:30. And I jumped straight up in the air.
Near Baltimore, Frank Carvin watched the reports knowing that his sister Paula, a flight attendant, was on the plane, headed off on vacation with her 9-year-old son Jay. A lively, outgoing boy, Jay had been given the trip to Paris by his mom as a special birthday present, his first visit overseas.
The hotline number is 1-800.
We had 6 phones going at one time trying to, get a hold of somebody on the other end, but that was fruitless.
Frank Carvin and his family finally took their portable phones and got in a caravan of cars headed north on I-95. On their way, they stopped to get Jay and Paula's dental records.
They just had the pictures of the ocean on fire, and you're just kind of shaking your head that, not wanting to give up hope, but, in all reality, knowing that there couldn't have been any survivors in something like that.
There have been no reports of survivors.
Helicopters also searching the waters, so far in vain.
Search and rescue effort will go all night and into the morning.
0 Mike Victor, frequency change approved.
What started as a routine drill for the Air National Guard was now the real thing, on a scale none of them could have imagined.
Within the first hour, there's at least 45 different vessels of every description searching for victims in the water.
The Coast Guard cutter ADAC raced to the crash site.
The water was just littered with wreckage, just pieces of the airplane everywhere.
These flames are still shooting about 50 to 100 feet into the air.
Flames were burning. They were burning really hot. There was a bright glow. A lot of debris. You could see the searchlights going everywhere.
The search and rescue conditions are, in short, hellish tonight on the dark Atlantic Ocean.
We came up on our first body, and it was a man still strapped in his chair. He was upside down in the water.
People were brought in bags, black bags. The bag would be opened. I would say the prayer over them very rapidly, and then they would be taken and put on trucks.
Father Jim McDonald was among the clergy waiting dockside as the first bodies were brought ashore.
A cataclysmic sadness to see people who were so happy and to see their mortal remains, to see them, their bodies destroyed. Very sad.
Father McDonald would later learn that he had been with 2 of those people at one of their happiest moments.
May they reach old age in the company of their friends.
6 years before, he had married Eric Holst, a young dentist, to his bride, Virginia.
Their anniversary was the weekend of the crash.
Eric's parents were waiting for the couple in Paris, where the rest of the family had already gathered for another son's wedding. An exotic locale for the young couple who had lived all their lives less than 15 miles from where Flight 800 had fallen from the sky.
They were probably looking out the window of the plane trying to see the lights from the neighborhood where they lived when this all happened. And I can just imagine them holding hands and looking out that window together.
Go ahead, some traffic, no tanker.
As the moonless night grew darker, the C-130 tanker circled over the burning fields of debris, spitting out flares to aid in the search. The Black Hawk came upon a large group of dark shapes drifting in the water.
There are 20 to 30 bodies that we're looking down at, and we're moving them with the rotowash. We're looking for signs of life.
Tragedy in the skies of New York. A high school French club from our area and some of their parents were apparently on board TWA Flight 800.
Hearing the news, worried parents in the tiny town of Montoursville, Pennsylvania, gathered at the high school parking lot. Just the previous day, a group of their children had set off from there. 16 students and their 5 chaperones. They had boarded buses for the first leg of a French club trip to Paris. 16-year-old Cheryl Nybert had her mother take pictures to go with the article Cheryl was writing for the school paper. All the other pictures taken that day were on cameras that went on the trip with the rest of the teens.
Rance Mackenzie Hetler.
Rance Hetler, on a last summer fling before college to pursue his dream to become an FBI agent. Amanda Karshner, excited to use her 3 years of French. Larissa Eusipis had picked raspberries with her friend Cheryl for 2 weeks to earn money for the trip. Julia Grimm had raised the funds by babysitting. When Kim Rogers' father dropped her off at the bus, he told her not goodbye, but au revoir. Till we meet again. She was still waving as the bus drove out of sight.
I'd seen them out in the parking lot, and they were jumping around and getting set to take the trip of their lives.
A day later, Vice Principal Ray Huff was taking 2 more buses to New York, this time filled with subdued families, hoping for a miracle.
When we hit New York and we were just before the Holland Tunnel, the thing that will stay in my mind is a picture of the people who were selling newspapers, and they were holding the papers up, and the headlines seemed to be in 200-point print or something like that, no survivors. And obviously, the parents who were awake saw that. So then it was pretty evident that all had been lost.
The harsh morning light revealed a grim confirmation of everyone's worst fears and frustrations.
With 230 people dead, it happened right in front of our faces. We have how many $1 million of equipment here? How many 100,000 hours of training? 5 minutes away by helicopter, with the aircraft in the air at the moment of the tragedy, and we couldn't rescue a single person.
The families and loved ones of 230 people had only their memories to hold close. And for a few, random keepsakes left by fate, keepsakes that would be treasured for a lifetime.
Hello, my darling baby. This is your mother.
Renee Green, who had traveled the world each summer in search of adventure, left the sound of her voice for her daughter. One last phone message to say goodbye.
I'm leaving to the airport now. I'm sorry that I didn't get a chance to see you. I miss you already. I love you. Oh, goodbye, my baby. Mwah. I love you. Bye-bye.
Relatives could not have known that it would be 2 weeks before most of them could bring their loved ones home. And even today, there are 14 victims whose remains have not been recovered. So, with the families waiting desperately for word of a miracle, the search for the cause of the crash gets underway. In a moment, we'll go inside the investigation and see for the first time dramatic pictures of the recovery effort by divers on the ocean floor.
When news is flashed of an airliner crash, usually the first thing that happens is a frantic search for survivors. And if none is found, a quick recovery of the victims' bodies. But there's always something else that begins immediately behind the scenes. The search for what happened. Very important, particularly if it turns out that something occurred that could happen to another airliner unless preventive measures are taken. But because TWA 800 exploded over the ocean, both these searches for the victims' bodies and for the crash cause were hampered in a way that led to agonizing delay and frustration for everyone concerned. At a private club in New York City, federal, state, and local police officials happened to be together at a testimonial dinner.
Dinner was breaking up about 10 to 9. We were all walking out, and all the beepers started going off.
For James Kallstrom, head of the FBI in New York, it would be the first of many sleepless nights.
Got in our cars, got on the phone, and it was my office beeping me, telling me that TWA 800 was in the water off of Suffolk County. Then I called the director and informed him, told him we were setting up the command center. I mean, without knowing any facts, I mean, we were going to draw the conclusion right at that point that there was a 50-50 chance this was a criminal act.
The FBI set up a command center, a war room, bristling with police, the military, and government agencies, coordinating strategy. This is where James Kallstrom went about the business of investigating the crash, a business that became very personal as he raced to the command center.
One of those phone calls I made on the way back to the office was my wife calling me frantically because this very dear friend agent of ours was trying to reach me at home, not knowing I was in the city, to tell me that his wife, my dear friend Janet Christopher, was the senior stewardess on the airplane. And he was watching this on television. And what did I know? Well, I was flabbergasted. I mean, I was just, boom, it's like getting hit with a 2x4.
Within hours, the Moriches Coast Guard Station on Long Island swarmed with a massive emergency response.
We worked through the night, putting basically the resources in place out in Suffolk, coordinating with FAA. I was on the phone with NTSB.
Robert Francis, vice chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board, headed for the scene. His job would be to probe the possibility the crash was an accident. And he soon cautioned,
"We have no evidence at this point that this was not an accident."
But Kallstrom's job was to look for just such evidence.
If it is a terrorist event, we then have the challenge to find out who the perpetrators were, who the cowards were that did this.
We made that assumption. Did we know? No, we didn't know. Did we think it probable? Thought it was probable, absolutely.
By week's end, Kallstrom and Francis already had 3 theories about the cause.
The scenarios are there was a bomb on the plane was hit with a rocket, or there was a mechanical, electrical, or some malfunction on the plane that caused the plane to explode.
Everybody back up on the sidewalk.
As the shell-shocked families of the dead arrived at Kennedy Airport, they were bused to a nearby hotel. And for endless days, their private hell was a public spectacle.
It was like a disaster movie. People were just all over the place.
Over the next 2 weeks, Frank Carvin recorded a video diary for Primetime.
At this point, I'm not interested in why the crash happened or how it happened. I just want my sister and my nephew so we can go home.
Suffolk County Medical Examiner Charles Wetley led the team at the morgue.
We all can see Quincy on TV, and he identifies people very quickly. In reality, it is a slow, arduous, tedious process, and we have to be accurate.
5 days after the crash, the grieving families found some comfort when they were bused to a memorial service at the point of land closest to the crash scene.
People had lined up along the roadways with signs and, you know, God bless you and we love you. I gotta say that I don't think I'll ever be able to listen to bagpipes again without crying.
The service had been an emotional breakthrough, and the bad weather, which had been hampering recovery operations, was beginning to clear. Navy divers were at last able to dive.
Divers, traveling.
Well, we went down and we didn't know what to expect.
Petty Officer Alan Wharf was the first to dive to the ocean bottom and get a look at a horrible scene.
There was wreckage everywhere. It was like kind of like looking at a automobile wrecking yard that has everything stacked on top of itself. The victims were, you know, everywhere, and it was tough.
In this previously unreleased Navy video, you can see what he found. Wharf and a team of 150 divers would conduct 4,300 dives, recovering the wreckage and all but 14 of the victims' bodies. And they would do it while risking their lives in a tangled labyrinth of razor-sharp wreckage.
You've seen parts of the fuselage where the windows were crawling up and over that and under it, over luggage, over everything else, to actually get to the victims to recover them. It was something like some science fiction movie. It was almost unreal.
In this chilling tableau, even the sea life gave divers like Senior Chief Petty Officer Michael Brady a grim sense of revulsion.
That was one of the ways that we located the bodies. The crabs are scavengers, so wherever there were bodies, there were plenty of crabs. And that was also very difficult for the divers.
They were heroes, really, really heroes. No complaining. No one wanted a day off. They did this day after day after day after day, 24 hours a day.
Can you go back and look at that beach you just ran over?
Exactly 1 week after the crash, divers finally found the 2 bright orange boxes containing the flight data and cockpit voice recorder.
DVR or FDR?
Everyone hoped these boxes would contain a clue, but everyone's hopes were soon dashed.
The group found no acoustic evidence regarding the source of the catastrophic event.
The tape ends with a loud noise, but no clue as to what caused it. But suddenly Kallstrom found something else that looked a lot like evidence of a bomb.
We found some chemical traces in the airplane.
The swelling prospect of a breakthrough was too much even for this veteran cop. Kallstrom predicted that he would soon conclude that TWA 800 was brought down by a bomb.
I think within the next 48 hours we'll get something that we think is going to give us the clues that we need.
2 days became 2 months before Kallstrom learned the disappointing truth about the source of the chemical residue from an FAA explosives expert.
We can now confirm that those same explosive elements were used in canine training.
We knew that FAA and police do testing with drug-sniffing dogs, an important program to train these dogs on airplanes. We didn't know they were on this particular plane.
But divers would continue to recover wreckage and bodies for months to come, a process that for the families had been frustrating from the beginning.
It was constantly an up and down situation where...
Joan and John Holtz awaited the recovery of the bodies of their son, Eric, a dentist, and his wife, Virginia. At the Suffolk County morgue, a team of volunteers labored to identify the victims. But local dentist Stuart Novins needed no more than a glance when the body of his colleague, Eric Holtz, was wheeled into the autopsy room.
We were kind of elated that we found him. It felt like, fine, here's Eric. Eric's back home where he belongs.
And days later, Eric's mother, Joan Holtz, could report that his wife had been found.
When we got the call that Virginia was found, I screamed on the phone, they found her as if it was a lost child. And when you're looking back at it, it sounds so ridiculous and so terrible to think, how could you be joyful to find him? And yet, that's all we had.
And others came to closure also. The first night, the body of flight attendant Janet Christopher, James Kallstrom's friend, was recovered. And for Frank Carvin...
Thursday night, around 12:30, we were notified that they found Jay's body. A 9-year-old who had his whole life to look forward to. Oh, it just tears your heart out.
The wreckage of Flight 800 came ashore slowly. A wing here, an engine there, and seat by mangled seat, to be assembled in a hangar at an abandoned aircraft factory on Long Island. The wreckage was scrutinized, analyzed, and sent out for tests. But the results only deepened the mystery. The cargo containers contained no sign of a bomb in someone's luggage. The passenger cabin revealed no evidence of sabotage. And nowhere did investigators find anything to prove that the plane had been hit by a missile. In short, there is no evidence of a crime. Still, James Kallstrom and the FBI are not ready to give up looking just yet.
We're still going through the process. We could find something as we're standing right here. Somebody could be looking at something that we did not see before. But as of now, we have no evidence of a bomb, a missile, a criminal act, a device, a piece of shrapnel, or anything that was perpetrated by criminals.
Just today, Kallstrom sent a letter to the victims' families reiterating that there is still no evidence the tragedy was caused by a bomb, a missile, or any other type of device. But even as investigators report no evidence so far of a criminal act, some observers, not connected to the investigation, mind you, continue to insist it was a missile that brought down the plane. Not only a missile, but one fired by the United States Navy. That story when we return.
And now the disturbing reports that don't seem to go away. The problem of friendly fire is well known in wartime, but now in peacetime, the theory has been advanced by some that the U.S. Navy accidentally shot down TWA 800 and is covering it up with the cooperation of the FBI and top civilian government officials. Here is a look at the theory and at the one man doing more than anyone else to keep it alive.
Over 100 Long Islanders who say they saw a shaft of light streaking toward the jet seconds before the crash believe they know what happened.
Something was shot from the ground. It could be a missile.
If opinion were gospel, the missile minister would be Pierre Salinger.
Well, I don't think there's any question that it was fired by a naval missile and brought down now.
Salinger believes a Navy ship, in a horrible miscalculation during routine training exercises, fired an unarmed surface-to-air missile aimed at a target drone, which actually struck the airliner. We asked the FBI's James Kallstrom about Salinger's scenario.
Well, it's not true, Sam. It didn't happen.
You're 100% confident of that?
I am as confident as I can be in this business. 100% I'll give that to you.
But Pierre Salinger comes with considerable professional credibility. He was John F. Kennedy's press secretary, and for 15 years was a foreign correspondent with ABC News until his retirement from the network in 1993. He announced his theory at a speech in France. Salinger's hypothesis, widely trafficked on the internet, is based on this tape, seen here for the first time, of Kennedy Airport's FAA radar. The radar analyzed by a retired 747 pilot shows a blip within miles of TWA 800 seconds before it blew up. Salinger now believes the missile was fired from a submarine. How many people do you think are on a Navy submarine?
Oh, probably a few.
I'm certain there are, what, 100?
Maybe more. There are people who have told their family that they were on the ship and saw the missiles go down.
And you still hear that there was a second gunman in Dallas because someone told someone. Pierre, these conspiratorial theories are around every large incident. You, of all people, should know that.
Yeah, but I mean, this is not the first time that we've covered up on an important story.
We had a conversation. I told him that, I mean, where did you get this idea that we would cover this up?
Well, Mr. Kallstrom,
Yeah.
if there's a cover-up, you're part of it.
Well, I'm not, Sam, because there isn't one.
If there were a cover-up, this man would have had to okay it. Secretary of the Navy, John Dalton.
No sailor, no ship, no station of the United States Navy had anything to do with that terrible tragedy. I think Pierre Salinger owes the Navy an apology.
Well, if the FBI says no, and the Defense Department says no, the highest officers in our government say no, who's Pierre Salinger to say yes?
It's all against me, but I am still telling the truth.
But if it wasn't a missile, what was it that the witnesses saw? When we come back, you'll hear for the first time what the NTSB's chief investigator concludes was the cause of the disaster. For everyone who flies, a chilling warning has emerged from the investigation of TWA 800. The U.S. government agency charged with finding out what happened to the doomed flight believes it has uncovered the truth. And you're going to hear the chief investigator say that not only could this crash have been avoided, but what happened to that airplane could happen again to another. Out of this painful and complex three-dimensional puzzle, there has emerged a disturbing thought about the crash of TWA Flight 800. This explosion could have been prevented.
Yes, it could have been.
You are saying to me, very clearly I believe, that this didn't have to happen.
I am saying that to you.
The NTSB's chief investigator, Dr. Bernard Loeb, has looked at this rebuilt wreck from every angle and concluded that on July 17, 1996, TWA 800 was in no condition to fly. The cause of its destruction already on board, lurking in its belly. If it wasn't a missile, if it wasn't a bomb of some sort, what could it have been?
If it is none of those things, it is going to be something associated with the airplane.
And so, for the first time, Loeb takes us back to the tarmac at Kennedy Airport to solve the mystery of Flight 800. The 747 had been baking under the hot sun for more than 2 hours. But it was cool inside the aircraft thanks to 2 air conditioners located beneath the center fuel tank.
While they're running, trying to cool the cabin, they are also producing a lot of heat.
The tank was virtually empty, a cost-saving measure common among airlines, as the fuel wasn't needed for a flight to Paris.
We believe that because the airplane had been sitting on the ground for a while and because the air conditioning packs were running for 2 hours, that produced enough heat to heat the little bit of fuel that was in the center tank and produce an explosive vapor in the tank.
There are 5 fuel tanks in a 747, 2 in each wing, and between them, the center fuel tank. Inside the center tank, a series of chambers about the size of a 2-car garage. To see how explosive vapor can build up in here, just remove the gas cap from your car when the gauge is on empty. That's the sound of explosive fuel vapor. If this tank was full, there would be less vapor and less chance of an explosion.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, we do ask that you have your tickets and boarding cards.
But on July 17th, as passengers boarded the aircraft, as the jumbo jet pushed back and lumbered out onto runway 22 right, Nobody knew that just inches below the cabin floor, the fuel tank was a virtual bomb, ready to explode.
Flight attendants, please be
Not the first officer, Ralph Kevorkian, and not Captain Steve Snyder.
His right hand brings the 4 throttles of these big JT9 engines on up to the about the vertical.
John Nance is a veteran 747 pilot and ABC News aviation consultant.
Then they go on up to full power and you hear a tremendous roar and you feel yourself being pushed back a little bit in the seat. The co-pilot calls out V1, VR. The captain begins to pull the yoke back towards him, and the airplane begins to lift off the ground. All the tires are finally off the runway at about 8:19 plus 30 or 40 seconds. And as he is lifting now past 200, 300, 400 feet, the gear is retracted. He's calling progressively for the flaps to be retracted.
As the plane climbed through 10,000 feet, it was still light. The sunset visible through the windows on the left side of the plane. What happened next, 11 minutes after takeoff, has taken 11 months to reconstruct. The last moments of Flight 800, recounted by Bernard Loeb.
The first thing that happened, there wasn't an explosion. The front portions of the fuel tank went forward and the airplane started to open up at the bottom. Pieces of the airplane started to come off and move upward towards the window belt on each side of the airplane.
Does the flight crew say anything?
We have no idea what went on in the cockpit.
The indication that you would have had in the cockpit of something that catastrophic would have been a combination of a tremendous force pushing you in your seat in one direction or another.
Any idea what, for a split second, might have gone through the mind of Captain Snyder?
There is a thing called time dilation. Time dilation can take a 5-second period and make an eternity out of it. The confusion factor in the human mind when something like this hits you is such that you're just along for the ride, if you have any consciousness of what's going on at all.
At some point, enough of the structure just in front of the fuel tank was gone that the airplane could no longer support the nose. At that point, the airplane was probably still developing lift. In fact, it may have continued to climb for a short period of time.
The nose is broken off. It's headed toward the ocean. What happened then, you think, to the right fuel tank?
Well, I think shortly after that, tank number 3 that was closest to the body had significant quantities of fuel in it. It opened up, and this resulted in a very extensive fire on the right side. The airplane began to break up as it moved towards the ocean.
The rapid decompression, the impact of the wind, the breaking up of the structure, no one was conscious through that.
That would have been merciful.
Yes.
There have been no survivors from plane.
Merciful, maybe. But this disaster could have been avoided, according to the chief investigator.
Preclude the ability to have an explosive vapor, you preclude the accident.
How do you do that?
There are a number of ways in which to do that, and we have already made recommendations to address that issue.
Coming up, a primetime investigation into decades of warnings and proposed safety measures that, according to investigators, not only could have prevented the crash of TWA 800, but could prevent future disasters in the sky. The National Transportation Safety Board's chief investigator is right. The cause of the TWA 800 crash has been identified. How to keep it from happening is known. So why weren't corrective measures taken in the past? And now, perhaps more importantly, why aren't they being taken to prevent similar crashes in the future? The answer you're about to hear may shock you. In 1989, an Avianca 727 crashed in Colombia when fuel vapors were ignited by a bomb that was otherwise too small to destroy the aircraft. The next year, a Philippine Airlines 737 exploded at Manila Airport when vapors ignited in its center fuel tank. And back in 1976 in Madrid, Spain, an Iranian 747, virtually identical to TWA 800, exploded when fuel vapors were ignited by lightning. There is no evidence that lightning hit Flight 800. But if there was also no bomb or missile strike, what could have provided the spark that set off the explosion?
If you use an airplane beyond its life, the people fly unsafely.
But how old is too old? Former NTSB member Vernon Gross points out that TWA 800 was among the first 747s ever built. It had taken off and landed safely more than 16,000 times. And over that period, things begin to wear. Of particular concern to Gross is the wiring. Well, does wire last forever?
I don't really think it does. It ages like everything else. The insulation on that wire is the thing of problem.
The Navy learned that the hard way back in the early 80s. When it had problems on its early F-14 fighters with a wire called Poly-X.
This is a photo of Poly-X wiring that is evident of cracking all the way down to the conductor.
Ed Block was a supervisor at the Defense Industrial Supply Center in Philadelphia when he began looking into Poly-X.
Here, 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 throughout the entire wire, you can see these cracks, these gross cracks.
So the Navy purged Poly-X, either replacing it in critical areas or retiring the aircraft. But civilian aircraft wired with Poly-X continued to fly, and one of them was TWA 800. In letters to the NTSB obtained by Primetime, major aircraft manufacturers reported problems with Poly-X wiring, although they denied that Poly-X has ever been a safety concern in commercial aircraft. The wire manufacturer maintains that the problems were not with the wire, but rather the special conditions it was exposed to in military aircraft. At his lab in Washington, Chief Investigator Bernard Loeb examined the wiring. He examined 2 pumps from the center fuel tank. A 3rd pump is still missing. He considered that static electricity may have jumped between loose clamps or fittings inside the fuel tank. But so far, Loeb has been unable to find that any of this produced a spark. We may never know what that spark was. That's very scary.
You're correct, but if the tank did not have an explosive vapor, fuel air vapor in the tank, it wouldn't matter whether the ignition energy was there because there would be nothing to ignite.
A novel idea? Get rid of the fuel vapor? Not at all. In the Arizona desert at Davis-Monthan Air Base near Tucson, 5,000 retired military aircraft are parked. But old as they are, many of them flew in their prime with protection from the possibility of a fuel vapor explosion. The Air Force learned about the problem of fuel vapor in Vietnam. When planes like these flew into combat, they would often be hit by ground fire. And if the projectile went through a nearly empty fuel tank, the plane would sometimes explode. Well, the Air Force discovered it couldn't always do something about the ground fire, but it could do something about the fuel vapor.
We did what we call an inerting system.
Dr. Mike Hines, an Air Force veteran and pilot who teaches air crash investigation, explains inerting.
They would actually put a gas, an inert gas, a non-flammable gas, would not support combustion into the tank and therefore eliminate or purge out the fuels.
Had the commercial airlines followed the lead of the military, TWA 800 might have landed safely in Paris, in the view of the NTSB's Bernard Loeb.
This accident, or any accident that is similar, does not have to occur, and in December, 6 months ago almost, we made recommendations to fix this problem.
Those recommendations included putting inerting systems in commercial aircraft, or at least reducing explosive vapors by adding cold fuel just before takeoff, or removing vapors altogether by simply making sure the center fuel tank was full. But the FAA, to whom the recommendations were made, has not ordered them into effect.
What we have said to the NTSB in not adopting their immediate recommendation is that we believe there's technical debate that needs to take place.
Tom McSweeney is director of the Aircraft Certification Service for the FAA. He questions whether inerting will make fuel tanks safer. But many observers believe it's really a question of money for the FAA.
Well, every time we look at an airliner, something that doesn't produce revenue has maybe a tough time being justified economically.
But the Air Force had proved you could do it.
That is correct, but there was an economic barrier.
You mean it's the old business of a cost-benefit analysis? It costs this much, we would only save this many lives?
And every life has a value.
According to the FAA, that value is $2.7 million. If one life is lost in an air crash, and the cost of a safety measure to prevent it from happening again is more than that, the FAA likely would not order the safety measure. We've been told that you use a formula of $2.7 million per passenger life. Is that correct?
Every agency in the government is required to do cost-benefit analysis of rulemaking that they propose. Every loss of life is important. We have to do the economic analysis. We have to use a value.
Under the FAA formula of $2.7 million each, the 230 lives aboard TWA 800 are worth about $621 million. If inerting the commercial fleet costs more than that, and it would, experts say this crash alone will probably not cause the FAA to order that extra layer of safety. But what do you say to the relatives of the people who died aboard TWA 800? Gee, it just wasn't economically feasible to do this.
Unfortunately, that's almost the bottom line.
It's a pretty grim bottom line, Dr. Hines.
Yes, but those type of decisions are made in the aviation world almost every day.
Indeed, past fuel vapor explosions have been deadly. In Manila, 8 people were killed. In Madrid, 17 died. And in Colombia, the death toll was 107. None of these past crashes caused the FAA to impose safety measures that the NTSB says might have prevented this disaster. And what about the future? Is it reasonable to fear that this accident could repeat itself this summer?
There is nothing that we know of in the certification of this airplane that would lead us to believe today that there's an event out there that would cause an accident.
But the man in charge of solving the mystery of Flight 800 says this complicated puzzle has revealed enough to issue a new warning that he hopes the FAA will not ignore. If you're right about the vapor buildup in the center tank of TWA 800, why, that could happen again this summer.
It absolutely could, Sam.
Do you think the public is going to stand for that?
I personally hope, I know our board feels the same way, that the public doesn't stand for that the public lets the FAA know that this is unacceptable.
As a result of the TWA 800 investigation, Boeing, the manufacturer of the 747, tells us during the next few weeks it will ask all airlines to inspect that center fuel tank to ensure the safety of passengers. And TWA, which currently has 6 747s in service, says those planes are well maintained and safe. The airline has told us the 747s will all be taken out of service and retired by the end of this year. That's our program for tonight. Don't forget Nightline after your local news. I'm Sam Donaldson. Good night to all of you, and to you too, Diane.
Good night, Sam. We'll leave you tonight with a remembrance. We ask the victims' families for the pictures they cherish, and this is